HanselMinutes.com, it's Hansel Minutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman, hosted by Carl Franklin. This is Lawrence Ryan announcing show number 60, recorded Wednesday, April 18th, 2007. Support for Hansel Minutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. Support is also provided by /N Software Red Carpet Subscriptions, the most comprehensive solution for adding connectivity to your .NET and ASP.NET applications, with components for every major internet protocol. Online at www.nsoftware.com. And by .NET Developers Journal, the world's leading .NET developer magazine. Online at www.sys-con.com. In this episode, Scott and Carl discussed Silverlight.
Hi, this is Carl Franklin. You're listening to Hansel Minutes from HanselMinutes.com. I'm here with Scott Hanselman, as I am every week. Hi, Scott.
How are you, sir?
Okay, well, not every week. Once in a while, I go away. But anyway, this show is about Silverlight.
Right, Silverlight, the return or the renaming, the rebranding of WPFE.
And this is a sort of a making it right show, because our 46th show we did on WPFE, I guess you had some comments on your blog about it?
Well, that was the show when I had a food poisoning like the day before.
Ah, right.
And, now, I'm not necessarily saying that it was the bad teriyaki that caused the show to be bad, but I would say that of the 60 shows we've done, it was not the best show.
Okay.
And people in the comments on my blog said so, and I agree with them. You can read the comments on my blog about show 46 at shrinkster.com/O3P.
Okay.
This is show 60, so this is 14 better than that show.
Right, right after that.
We're going to fix this. Okay, so WPFE, I was a little confused the last time, and I mixed up some of my information between WPF and WPFE, so let's talk about it. So now it's called Silverlight, and it's going to be a browser plugin. It's going to support Firefox, IE, and Safari. So We're talking about Mac here. So This is going to work on the Mac. Now, before, we had talked about WPF, and I mixed things up a little bit. But WPF, right, is the managed presentation layer that you can use to write applications that run outside the browser.
Natively.
Well, I wouldn't say they're managed applications, but they're not native applications. They run in Windows.
That's a good point. But they run outside the browser. I guess that's,
right.
That's
so let's
the way
use
to
the
say
terms
it.
outside the browser and inside the browser.
Good enough.
Okay. So WPF uses XAML, XAML. This is the markup that is Microsoft's markup. That's like, you can say things like canvas, rectangles, you can do shapes, and it's basically a complete markup for describing an interface, but it also includes animation, and you can hook up events to code behind. So it's a complete way of describing an interface.
Right. It's like ASP.NET for desktop applications. It's the way I like to say it.
Okay, yeah, you could say that.
Yeah, it's markup. It's UI markup.
Exactly, it's UI markup, and it's very deep. There's a great book. Chris Sells has got a great book. I'm not sure if it's quite out yet. I've been reading some previews of it, but it's on XAML, and also Charles Petzold has got a book on doing WPF.
Ah, that's got to be good.
Okay, so Petzold is the man. I read his book Code, which is fantastic.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a couple different ways you can do this, right? You can run desktop applications. You just run them with WPF, not WPFE.
Right.
You can do click once, and then you can run things inside the browser frame as an XBAP. XBAP. This is like using what I used to do was just called ActiveX documents. We used to call them VBPs.
So XBAP is an actual managed application with the full framework required running inside the browser? Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. So XBAP is WPF running as the browser being its frame. Okay.
Right.
Now, WPFE, now Silverlight. So Silverlight also reads XAML, parses XAML at runtime, renders XAML itself, but it is its own XAML rendered.
Right.
Silverlight is not WPF.
Right.
It's not managed code. It is its own XAML parser, and it happens to be a slightly a smaller subset of XAML. There are things that you can do in WPF that you can't do in WPFE.
And they've implemented some of the framework functions as well, haven't they?
Well, this is where it gets, because we don't know this yet, because they're going to announce this at Mix. So I can only refer to things that I know on the net. So I can only refer to things that people have said publicly.
Well, I've heard publicly that...
So let's talk about that.
Yeah,
I've actually listed all the things you can say. So I don't want to speculate on Mix because I'm under NDA, so I can speak to what I know on the net. So here are some quotes on the net, right?
Yeah.
And these are the ones you're referring to. So Mike Harsh, one of the PMs on Silverlight, said on his blog in March of 2006, he said, and I quote, the WPFE package will contain a small cross-platform subset of the CLR that will run C# and VB.NET. Yes, we are bringing C# programming to the Mac.
Yes, that's what I've heard as well.
Exactly. Now, Rory interviewed Scott Gu.
Right.
And he said, also, this is interesting, is there any possibility of having the framework that runs outside the browser? And Scott said, well, that's something that we're looking into. We call it the in-browser experience and the out-of-browser experience. Rory then said, well, is this secret? I don't want to bring up anything that is secret. Scott said, no, that's not something we've talked about publicly, but it's something we're thinking about. And he told Rory it was okay to keep it in his Channel 9 video.
And he didn't say yes, and he didn't say no. And he also said, we'll be talking about that at Mix.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at the links for this show, Paul Wilson had a pretty good analysis of this announcement at shrinkster.com/O3R. And he pulled these things together, including some information by Joe Stegman. And Joe Stegman said, we will support a small cross-platform CLR execution engine that will run on both windows. So it's a different CLR, according to what Joe Stegman is saying.
Right.
And it gives the impression that you'll be doing your development on Windows and then deploying it, and then the runtime will work fine on the Mac and on the PC. So it's a tiny cross-platform CLR.
Well, this is what I've heard about Silverlight from the beginning, WPFE, that there was going to be a small subset of the .NET framework that'll be managed that will run for WPFE applications. Right.
It seems that people are saying, again, publicly, that there's the tiny CLR and then a chunks of the BCL that will be available, the base class library.
Right.
Now, where do you fit this into your applications? And this is something that I think I got a little confused about in the last show. So it seems to me that before, I had thought that one might want to make a giant full-screen Silverlight application, and the way that people use a lot of the Adobe Flex applications. Like if you go to maps.yahoo.com, that is all Flash now. It's a big giant Flex application, Adobe's Flash Flex, which is pretty cool. You should check out maps.yahoo.com.
Well, and Adobe, or Macromedia, I guess even before that, had the Flash player, which ran outside the browser.
Yeah,
right?
I remember that. Exactly. So, now we'll talk about that and what it means with Apollo, because we're going to be juxtaposing in browser and out of browser. So let's get back to Silverlight.
Right.
So Silverlight is going to be a plugin that lets you bring XAML parsing, richer parsing and richer experience than HTML into the browser. PC and Mac, Firefox, Safari, IE. Now, the cool part, and the part I didn't quite figure out last show, or the show 46, was that every single element of XAML can be manipulated using JavaScript as if it were just another piece of DHTML.
Right.
So it's almost like an extended DOM. You can reach into this Silverlight application and you can create XAML dynamically. So there's a couple ways you can get XAML into this. You can have it directly on your HTML pages, like an embedded piece of XAML, like an island of XAML. You can have it come in as a file, like JavaScript source equal. You can have the XAML come in externally. And the thing that is generating externally could actually be creating it. It could be a static piece of XAML on the file system and being served by the server, or you could have an ASPX page or an HTTP handler dynamically generating XAML. So the creation of XAML can be done on the server side, on the client side. You could have JavaScript that creates XAML. There's some good samples up at the Silverlight SDK that show you how to, on the client side, retrieve RSS, parse it, and dynamically generate XAML and insert it into a Silverlight instance, all in the browser.
Yeah.
Now, this use of JavaScript has confused some folks because there's a gentleman named Ted who has a blog called Ted on Flex. He is a Flash evangelist, just like Microsoft has evangelists, so does Adobe. His stuff is at shrinkster.com/O3U. And he has a post about Silverlight versus Flash. And in that, he says that, and this is a quote, he says, seeing as the CLR didn't make version 1.0, this is a dead loser. Depending on JavaScript to power Silverlight is a big mistake. It severely limits high-end potential. Now, I can understand why it's confusing, because I have a feeling that it's going to take a while for this to kind of sink in what Silverlight's trying to accomplish. But what I seem to understand, what I have gleaned is that using JavaScript to interact with Silverlight is expected in an Ajax application where you've inserted Silverlight as an active part of the page.
Yeah.
But given that we're gleaning that we're going to have a CLR running inside here, running inside a Silverlight instance, they're not going to be using JavaScript to power it, but rather to automate it as appropriate. So there's going to be some kind of interesting design and architectural decisions to figure out what you're going to write in C# and what you're going to write in JavaScript.
You know, the thing that comes to mind immediately is that there are more parts to this than a simple SWF file.
You know, that's a really, really good point, because what they're doing is providing a thing to bring together all of the different pieces that one might want to use in a really active application. If you look at the architecture overview, that MSDN page, the Silverlight SDK is at shrinkster/041, and the architectural overview is at shrinkster/042. They have this notion of a content package. This is one other way that you could bring an active application down. So there's XAML, there's JavaScript, there's images, potentially some embedded fonts, and then media like a WMF, like a Windows media file. So what you just said is exactly right. There's all of your assets that you might want to use in an active application that can be potentially packaged up, and sent down, including information from streaming media sources.
Now, how do you I'm understanding WPF is created with with the expression blend and all of this stuff. Do you see expression blend being able to create WPFE? Absolutely.
That's exactly what they expect you to do.
I see.
You're going to, or you can write them in any number of applications, because the idea of file save as XAML is going to be integrated in more and more design applications.
But it's not just XAML. I mean, it's the code behind it. I mean, when you're talking WPFE, where's, the code is on the client. When you're talking WPF, it's sort of,
With both of them as a developer, you're going to use Visual Studio.
Yeah.
And you're going to use, and with the expression kind of family of products, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? You might be using Blend to do WPFE or WPF. You might be using, expression design to actually create an asset?
Yeah. Well, what you just said there, I can't imagine using Visual Studio to create a non-managed, any kind of code assembly.
Visual Studio has better JavaScript debugging than people give it credit for.
Yeah.
And of course, with all of these stuff like the IE development toolbar and Firefox debugging stuff like Firebug, JavaScript is becoming a whole programming world of its own, and the browser is the IDE. So it may feel a little fragmented initially because you're dealing with a lot of different little text files and such, but those text files can be generated by a number of different tools. You can use the WPF plugins for Visual Studio to do the editing, as long as you only use the subset of XAML that Silverlight supports. You can use ASP.NET. You could do, and there's nothing about ASP.NET required for Silverlight. Certainly, we're hoping that people will use this wherever they want to. Now, one of the things that's significant about Silverlight is that we're talking about Windows Media support and codec support on the Mac. So they're also kind of promoting Windows Media a little bit more. I think that just as video has been the killer app for Flash with YouTube, I think that they're hoping the same thing for Silverlight. And being able to have much better codec support on the Mac is going to be better. Also, they're going to have high definition support for 720p, depending on your CPU. So that's going to be pretty cool.
Now, I'm looking at the Microsoft.com/Silverlight page, and there's a video there that you can play, and my first thought was, that's funny. They're going to have a flash video to show Silverlight. But then I clicked play video, and it installed Silverlight.
Yeah. If you right click and do a view source, you can see on the load there, they say new Silverlight player.
Right. So we're actually watching a lightweight video a la Flash stream through this web browser using their technology.
We're not using Flash stream. They're streaming a WMV.
Right.
This issue about Flash versus Silverlight is a contentious one. I mean, I'm a Microsoft developer, and they've kind of paid my mortgage for a number of years, but I don't want to be considered a religious zealot. So, I mean, I'm excited about Silverlight. But at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why aren't more developers using Flash and Flex?
That's right? A good point.
There's a guy named Graham Harker who's got a great flex.net blog, and he asked that question, why don't more developers use Flex? And I think that it's part of the, I would agree with him that it's part about this good developer network. I mean, Microsoft has done a fine job of releasing just a ridiculous amount of information on MSDN. And their MSDN universal subscriptions are really, what it's all about. The fact that they released Expression as part of, or parts of the Expression suite rather, to MSDN subscribers just makes it so easy, because how does a developer try to get support for doing something on WPFE? Well, I'm going to go and download it from my MSDN subscription,
absolutely,
do a prototype, and I'm going to show my boss, right? So it's got to be just that easy as well to go and do the same thing, right? So Adobe has a similar network called the Enterprise Developer Network, and they're getting a lot better to wooing the .NET developers. You can go to flex.org, and they've got a whole bunch of information up there about how you can talk to Flex with .NET, how you can get onto their developer network. And they're doing a much better job of opening it up. Early versions of Flex required the Flex server, but now the Flex 2 stuff, you don't need to have an Adobe server on the back end. You can have .NET pulling out web services. There's a really great tutorial on Graham's site where he creates a little .NET page that returns some XML and makes a dynamic Flash chart using their stuff. It's called MXML. So Microsoft has XAML and Adobe has their MXML, and it's really simple. I mean, it's like MX : application. You set some colors, point it to a service, and you say MX : line chart. And in like 15 lines, he's got a dynamic Flash chart.
Wow.
It's way easier than I remember making Swift files back in the day. But the real question is, how are they going to be able to woo the developers? Because they've got 97%, 98% penetration. I mean, that's how many internet-enabled PCs have Flash on it.
Huh.
It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
And how many have Silverlight, right? 0.
How many have Java?
87% have Java.
Right. You don't see any. It's funny that Java is completely out of this conversation. I mean,
that's a good point. It is because people started to fear it, right? I mean, you ever get that kind of pause as you visit a page that has Java on it?
No, yeah.
You kind of go,
I agree.
Oh, no, everything's going to fall apart now because I've just reached a play with Java. Now, the problem with Flash is that people associate it with banner ads and they associate it with flashy things.
Right.
So
eye candy.
I think that there's largely a perception issue with managing Flash. And then there's also a little bit of that confusion between what was Flash and what was Shockwave. Early on, I was very confused about there's Shockwave and all the 3D stuff and the games you can do in Shockwave. And that was a big download. It was like 4 or 5 megs. And then Flash is just tiny, 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 and it exists everywhere already. So there's definitely going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how Microsoft pushes out this runtime. Right now, they're saying the runtime is going to be about 1 megabyte, maybe 1.5 megabytes on Windows, and then a little bit bigger on the Mac, because the Mac has both the PowerPC and the Intel chips.
Right.
So they have the universal binary format. So the Mac version's a little bigger. But once it comes down, it's just like Flash. The question is, how few clicks can they get it down to? And then what's the security story going to be like?
Hey, did you see Keith Elder's response to Rory and Scott's video?
That's at shrinkster.com/Rory O3Z.
Yeah, he takes it all the way to the iPhone in speculation.
Yeah, now he's speculating that this could potentially go to a mobile device.
Right.
That, if WPFE is only a megabyte and it's a little tiny CLR again, you could get, he calls it mobile eye candy.
Yeah.
And this brings into question kind of the whole CLR ecosystem now. We've got maybe 2 CLRs on the desktop. We've got WPF, Silverlight. See, it's going to take a while for me to get used to that.
Still.
So we've got .NET 3.0, and then we've got this tiny runtime, this tiny thing, and then also on the Mac now. But then on the mobile device, which he's totally speculating, we've already got the compact framework. So it'll be interesting to see, which frameworks survive. Have they written a better framework?
So everybody thought Show 46 was confusing. I'm just as confused today as I was then.
It's a shame. Let's try to review, because I'm feeling this is a little bit spastic, and we still haven't gotten to talk about Apollo.
The fact is that there's still a lot we don't know.
Well, there is, and we're going to find out at Mix.
Right.
Rory and I filmed a number of videos for Mix that we should release on Channel 9 soon, and I know that there's going to be stuff at Mix that no one knows, no matter how much speculation there is.
Right, and Richard and I are going to be interviewing Brad Abrams during that same week of Mix, so we're going to pick his brain about everything they're announcing there too.
Right, and I'm going to talk to Scott Guthrie while I'm down there as well.
So we're covering it, folks.
Oh, it's covered.
Yeah.
So let's try to review here for a second. Okay, so WPF, the Windows Presentation Foundation, would be the rich XAML-based replacement for GDI that runs outside the browser and requires .NET 3.0.
Yes.
Runs on Vista, runs on XP.
Yep.
Okay. WPFE, now called Silverlight. Silverlight is a tiny, about 1 meg, unmanaged plugin for browsers. It'll run on Firefox, IE, and Safari. So far, they've announced support for Mac. They've announced support for Windows. They're saying they're going to take it back to Windows 2000, but I don't know. It'll at least work on XP and Vista.
Nothing about Linux, huh?
Nothing yet about Linux. I don't know. But if you remember that the Mac is Linux.
Well, that's
Mac is Unix.
FreeBSD based, right?
So just the fact that they got it working in the Mac is a good sign.
It's a very good sign.
But at the same time, there's so many flavors of Linux, and there's so many different browsers. So it would be, which one do they do? Would they do Ubuntu?
That's very true.
Ubuntu and SUSE, and which browsers?
That's one of Linux's big problems.
So back to the review. So you can embed your XAML on HTML pages. You can fit a Silverlight object kind of seamlessly into an existing ASP.NET and an AJAX application.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's fair to say that Silverlight would replace your application. Rather, they would augment it. If you wanted to add a bit of activeness to your site,
right?
Active charts, active graphs, new kinds of visualizations, video, stuff like that.
Right.
You're going to be using the tools that you already use: JavaScript, AJAX, ASP.NET, or whatever markup you're used to using.
There's every reason to believe that it'll be a subset, just like Pocket PC is a subset, whereas the stuff that's implemented is backward compatible.
Right. I have a feeling that people who know C# and VB.NET will find their investments to be safe.
I'm sure they will.
Okay. Now, on the we haven't given them fair time. We should probably actually interview a Flex guy. We should actually have someone who knows Flex give me a call, and we'll do a whole show on Flex.
Right. And then we got to talk about Apollo.
Okay. So Flex, of course, is the Flash Flex is Adobe's plugin. Of course, they have 98% penetration, while Silverlight has 0. People often call Silverlight the Flash killer. We don't know if that's fair or not, but it's clearly getting right into their space.
Yep.
I think that there is some really compelling reasons to take a look at Flash, and I think ubiquity, especially for public websites, is one of them. I think that Adobe does kind of a mediocre job of making .NET developers aware of this stuff, but that's kind of the job of the evangelist, to spread the word. I think that Graham's site is a good start. Ted on Flex has a lot of information about this. Now, Apollo is, and we've got a link to that up on the site. It's at shrinkster.com/O3X. We've got lots of links we haven't mentioned that are up there, so be sure to check it out. We've got screencasts of how to develop stuff in Flex. So I want to make sure, again, we're not able to give Adobe full time on this particular show, but we'll do a show in the future. So Apollo is the out of the browser, like you referred to Flash Player back in the day.
Right.
This is kind of like Flash Player plus plus plus. It's a cross operating system runtime for Adobe. So we're going to work on Windows and again on Mac. They're saying it's going to come out second half of 2007. It's going to work on Vista and XP, Surface Pack 2. It'll work on both versions of Mac, PowerPC, and Intel. They're going to have support for Flex, Flash, HTML, support to talk to the file system. So they're going to have a security model, JavaScript support. They're going to have a partially implemented native windowing API. So these applications could potentially look a lot like Windows apps and behave like them. But they will be running in their own process space. You can actually go up and get their alpha and run Apollo applications now. On the version that I used, you're sitting in your browser and you see a .air, AIR extension, and you click on it, and then it leaps out into the browser, almost like a click once experience, out into Apollo. They're also saying that for 1.0, they're going to have support for PDF and transparency and some different kind of cool things like that.
Cool.
The Apollo runtime, they're saying, is going to be between 5 and 9 megs. This is from the Apollo FAQ.
Okay.
And then you can just use HTML, JavaScript, or you can use all the Flex, Flash stuff. So it's a very similar environment. It's almost like Apollo is bringing they're trying to bring Flash as a complete runtime.
Right.
You know, I mean, it's
a small OS.
Yeah, it's a little mini. It's actually getting more into Java's VM space.
I was just going to say
a little bit more than it is getting into WPF space.
Okay. So I think we pretty much righted the wrongs and covered crossed the T's and dotted the I's.
And certainly brought up another of new questions and confused folks. We've got a whole pile of links to this kind of stuff.
Right.
I hope we did a decent job of explaining kind of how this fits in. I know that I feel a little less confused because I understand now how I would add support for Silverlight into my existing applications.
Right.
But I also need to spend more time looking at Flash and weighing the pros and cons, because all I really want to do is give a rich experience to my users, and I want to do it in the easiest possible way. 97% penetration or 98% penetration for Flash is pretty compelling, but a 1 meg download is for some applications is reasonable, especially if it doesn't require any existing runtime. Let me say this before we go. Just looking at the February CTP of Silverlight, still called WPFE at the time, I just ran a Silverlight sample, and I loaded up sysinternal's Process Explorer just to kind of look inside to see what's happening, because I want to see what DLLs get loaded.
How much memory it's using.
Exactly. And the WPFE stuff, it's only loading 4 DLLs on the version that I've got. They're all unmanaged. Currently, those DLLs have names like AG Core and AG Codec and AG CTRL, AG Control. Those are the tiny little DLLs, totally unmanaged code. I kind of tried to reflect into them. I used a tool called Dump Bin. It comes with the Windows SDK. You go dump bin /dependents. You can basically ask these portable executables. You can say, what dependencies do you have?
Right.
One of the things you want to find out when you're bringing something onto your system is, what do you need to have? So I ran dump bin on each of these things, and it's interesting. Most of them have just the basic dependencies, the C runtime, GDI 32. The only one that was particularly interesting, the only interesting dependency that I thought was that they depended on direct sound. So dsound.dll is in there, but all the other things are just the usual suspects. Shell 32, kernel 32, WinINet, stuff like that.
So it's very, very tight unmanaged code.
Yeah, it appears that they've squeezed a great deal of functionality into, a meg or two. And the dependencies that they have on external things are very minimal. Again, I'm totally speculating here, but it feels to me like since they have so few dependencies that the compatibility and the chances that this will work on everyone's machine without, a lot of versioning problems of the underlying DLLs it sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Again, total speculation based on one running of dump bin, but I encourage folks to do that kind of spelunking as they learn about this new technology.
All right, Scott, and everybody be listening around April 30th that week around Mix for the real scoop straight from the horse's mouth. From one end on Hansel Minutes, from the other on .NET Rocks. We'll get to the bottom of this, and I'm sure it's going to be good news. And Scott, that's a show.
Good deal.
All right, thanks again. We'll see you next week on Hansel Minutes.